We spend a lot of time thinking about what to do. And so much of life is defined by how you do what you do. And I think having this awareness and perspective up front of loss and of urgency and of finitude and just our place on earth and that perspective kind of essentially woven into the fabric of our fund and just this ability to bring all of that forward. It makes us happier day to day, which in turn makes us more productive, which in turn will produce a better result for the portfolio, which in turn produces a better result for the climate and for humanity. I don't think I'd ever formally put this together, but it begins with this integration of our sense of time on this planet, informed by the experiences that you and I have had that have then been amplified this summer, which I don't think we fully appreciated and anticipated when we got the fund off the ground.
Welcome to Climate Papa. This is a show about climate change, technology, and parenthood.
Well, welcome to episode 20 of Climate Papa, a show about the intersection of climate change, technology, and parenthood. And I'm your host, Ben Eidelson. I'm based in Seattle, and I invest in climate tech startups with a fund called Stepchange. And I'm a papa to 3 kids, a 6-year-old girl, a 3.5-year-old boy, and a 5-month-old boy. This conversation is with Anay Shah. Anay is my co-founder at Stepchange. I met Anay a bit over a year ago, and in a few quick months, he's become my other half on the fund. He's also become a close friend who is now sharing in the journey of parallel parenting as our youngest babies are less than a month apart. Before we hit record, I said to him that my goal for this conversation was to learn some new things about him. I want to learn new things about what drives the person that I'm now spending the majority of my workdays with. I was delighted with how much was uncovered and really how deep we got to go on the central themes of this podcast. With that, here's Anay.
Hi, I'm Anay Shah. I'm based in Los Angeles, California. I'm a co-founding partner at Stepchange, where we invest in climate tech companies. I'm also blessed to be the father of 2 children, a 5-year-old boy and a 3-month-old girl.
I was just looking back. I think we've come up on our 1-year anniversary.
I wanted to look that up. When was the email?
The email was in August. I need to dig back through the calendar to see like the first time we actually met. But it was like right around a year ago. Let's start with a softball. Who is Anay?
Oh, that's easy, right?
Let's do it. No time to waste. Right. Let's do it.
No time to waste. No fluffy intros. Well, the short answer before the long answer would be, I am a father of 2 children. Makai is 5. Samira is 3 months old tomorrow. The proud husband to Sheba, and based in LA, and a co-founder and partner at Stepchange.
Should we zoom back in time to who was Anay at looking at Makai at 5? Like who is Anay at 5? What was going on in your world then?
It's hard to not start with like classic Indian immigrant upbringing. You know, my parents came over in the 60s and 70s and were part of that wave. Growing up in a very classic immigrant household, parents and an older sister in suburban Maryland. And I think the best way to describe me was I was a late bloomer, and I probably still am.
Still blooming.
It's just always blooming. No, like, as a kid, in contrast to my sister and all the other like upstanding cousins and kids that are on their path to being doctors and lawyers, I was the one that was just playing outside, chasing lightning bugs, wouldn't read a book, would only read the sports page and the comic section, and fairly kind of fun-loving, happy-go-lucky, without a clear drive or motivation. Now, the benefit of growing up in that kind of environment is, you still end up doing well in the traditional school setting. So you get the A's and you kind of move on. My focus was all all friends, none of which looked like me. But that didn't matter back then when you were a kid, and it was the '80s, and just pursuing all the things that a kid should, which I think is very front of mind as we raise our kids today, and letting kids be kids. One big takeaway that I do keep forefront of mind is like, I think as a parent, you subconsciously project your hopes and dreams and your deficiencies onto your children,
and worries,
right?
Yeah.
Anxieties and everything else. And so of course, like, he's 5 years old, and I love that I'm decent at mental math, and so I want him to be really good. So I'm like constantly drilling him. But the great reminder is, like, I didn't care about anything until really on the 11th grade, when I had to do like college applications and SATs. And my mom went to my AP history teacher, and he was just like, good student, this and the other. He's like, he just needs another year to grow up before he can really go into this world. And that's, I think, a fitting description of childhood.
You feel like something in that kind of transition to college flipped something on? Like, did something motivate you differently, or was it more later? Okay, of the last year of us working together and me observing you, like, you seem very flipped on. You're like, right? Also, so something in the 35-year arc there shifted. Is there a year where you're like, okay, like, this is when the fire lit internally, right?
Yeah.
Versus, like, obviously what you're describing is you're in an environment where there's like a lot of external heat, but like that's a different thing.
No, it's a great observation. It's almost like something flipped on big, and then over the next 30 years, it's kind of like narrowed and honed in. Something compelled me up to a small liberal arts school in Connecticut called Wesleyan, and the dragon was unleashed. I can't tell you what it is, but taking me out of my home environment, putting me in a new environment with nobody I knew, in this just hotbed of different perspectives and life upbringings. And I started school in August of 2001. 9/11 happens, and obviously the world changed, and our world changed on campus. I think later on, Mother Jones ranked us the #1 most activist school in the country. It was just everywhere, and something tapped in that I think now, looking back and threading the needle, it's like, oh, we can draw parallels to, my mother's side of the family went from India to South Africa, and she actually grew up in South Africa, which a lot of Indians did following Gandhi. And my grandmother, my mom's mom, was the first woman in her village or area to be married without a veil, and it required them writing a letter to Gandhi and getting his kind of input into the village chief to say, no, we are fighting for women's equality as much as we are fighting for national equality and freedom. And I never met my grandfather on that side, but a strong rebellious streak. And so perhaps something in the DNA, something latent. My mom being a woman who left on a boat from India to England to do a 3-month residency program as a woman in the 60s, and then from there going to Alberta, Canada, and then from there moving to the U.S. With my father. And so something in there was tapped into, and Wesleyan brought it out. And I went from sports page and comic books to, like, if this wasn't a slow transition, this was like a very fast, like, deeply steeped in anti-establishment political theory and history and activism, and going down to New York routinely to protest against large institutions. I think now that sowed the seeds for now what is kind of a constant battle internally of a very strong anti-establishment kind of channel within me, with now this more professional post-business school, entrepreneur and leader and father and breadwinner and this, that, and the other, where you've got to work within the system to get things done. And I think the seeds were sown then.
It doesn't sound like it's just, this kind of rebelliousness, which, like, absent more of a defined channel, is just like, okay, whatever's going on, I'm just going to rebel for the sake of it feeling good to rebel. The thread you just wove, though, it sounds very purposeful and value-based. It's not like, I'm going to go do this thing to piss off the village just because I want to piss off the village. It's your grandmother doing that because, like, there was a point. Like, there was like, no, the old way of doing it isn't the arc that we want to be going down, and we want to push the arc forward. I think there's a nuance there that's highly potentially productive if channeled appropriately.
Right. I think, to your point, it sowed the seeds of a more kind of equity justice based lens, right? I found development economics. I was pre-med because you have to be. I actually loved and still love science. And
you just said a snippet of a sentence, because you have to be. Unpack that a little bit.
The Indian immigrant child who goes off to a liberal arts school instead of the top pre-med or engineering or law school, wading his way through activism, coming home on fall and Christmas break, trying to explain esoteric economic theories to their parents, and who has an older sister that was also pre-med, and a mom who's a doctor. So had to be pre-med, but I cherish those all-nighters in the science library studying biology and organic chemistry and physics. But I end up choosing, I did pre-med, but end up choosing international relations, and, going very, very deep as an undergrad into the systems of oppression and the roots of why we live in an unequal society and why some people have more than others. And to do a little loop back in time, we grew up going back to India, every couple of years. And that exposure, I think subconsciously and then later on consciously, was fairly formative in one side of the family is living in very modest situations. And we learned how to do a bucket bath there, and we learned how to go to the bathroom without a Western toilet. And obviously living without AC or even windows on the glass panes on the windows. And there's this one time in my teenage trip where I, against the wills and hopes of the aunties who would have never dreamt of doing this, like I walked into Dharavi, which is the largest slum in Asia, as in Bombay, and just kind of did a self-tour because I wanted to understand. I suppose I was seeking to see how people live and understand how and why, and very classic feelings of like people living with next to nothing materially, but also at the same time having so much richness in their community, and then understanding why that should exist and why someone who looks exactly like me but is born on the other side of the world has very different life opportunities than I do. And I think there's some mix of upbringing and those experiences, and then putting the theoretical foundations together with the lived experience, and not lived experience. I grew up very privileged, but lived experience visually, going back to India and other places that set me on this path to then forego the paralegal job that I worked so hard to get out of New York City as an undergrad. And I remember sitting with one of my good friends on Foss Hill at Wesleyan and just breaking down, like, what does it mean to take this path, and do I want it, and why do I feel this conflict? I turned down the big corporate law pathway, bought a one-way ticket to Hong Kong, and instead backpacked around China, because this was the time where the front page of Newsweek or Time magazine was like China versus India and the up and coming of these new superpowers. And I wanted to go and understand what that meant. So I studied Mandarin and backpacked around China for the next 3 to 4 months on whatever meager budget I had, and then ended up pursuing kind of that developmental economics kind of passion at the State Department, at USAID, which does our country's foreign assistance, which opened up a whole new chapter. I was there for around 4 years, one of the luckiest breaks, where I stumbled into a set of projects that wanted to overturn the model of traditional development and leverage the engine of capitalism for poverty alleviation. I worked on the ground in 13 or 14 different countries across Latin America, Asia, and Africa, and got exposure to problems within our education system, within public health, within financial inclusion, within governance. And I got this like very rich, broad, high-level view of essentially the challenges facing 4 billion people, 5 billion people on this planet, that took that theoretical activism and I think provided some humility to how hard it is to solve those, and then provided some tremendous perspective around how people live everywhere from the slums of Brazil to war-torn Afghanistan and in between. Saw the limitations there, got excited about this idea that you can actually, both for society, use for-profit means to create sustainable ends. And personally, this felt like the holy grail, the ends of the 2000s, this idea of impact investing and for-profit social enterprise, but just this model that it doesn't have to be this binary NGOs versus companies. There's actually a middle ground where you blend it together.
What did you find was the kind of limitations of government in those environments in terms of where, like government could only, what really left kind of that clear line for you that's like, this is not the way or the only way we need to do this?
That's a great question that I haven't thought about in a long time. But I think as a 20-some-year-old, the pace of change and the ability for me to uniquely enact that change and to be uniquely positioned to be someone who can drive some sort of outcomes, that was one of the biggest limiting factors, where I felt like I had gotten this exposure, I had gotten this appreciation, but it was like running with a parachute, and I needed to unleash the sprinter. I think that was ultimately what pushed me to leave a tremendous role inside the State Department and move to India on our 10-month unpaid fellowship to hawk solar lanterns across rural villages with this, new startup out of the D School at Stanford called D-Light, which had just launched and was designing an affordable solar lantern to offset kerosene and create a safer way to provide light for the billions of people that don't have access to electricity around this world. And the statistics are just mind-boggling that 10, 15 years ago, you have 420 million people in India and 2+ billion people around the world that don't have access to basic electricity. I met kids who at night would walk to this train station so they could have some light to do their homework, and other kids that were sitting next to a kerosene lantern, breathing in the toxic fumes just to get their work done. And that level of drive and focus is awe-inspiring. If we can send a man to the moon and we can do all these other things, how can we not solve this problem? And that's what D-Light set out to do in this classic, a product that is inherently a productive input into society, but does so on a for-profit basis and creates a payback mechanism for the consumer such that they can justify it and offset their kerosene costs. And this is my first experience as a startup, first experience in climate, first experience on the ground doing work in an emerging market. Those 10 months turned into 3 years running sales and partnerships across India. But a tremendous team, a company that's still going strong, is in 60, 70 odd countries, and has impacted over 100 million lives.
And so your role there was really distribution, right? Each of those meant in some cases thousands of households making this massive transition to their first electrical product. You're not selling like encyclopedias door to door here. It's something that was an existential upgrade in their life, in their safety, what their lungs are breathing in their education. I mean, it's amazing.
I'm so attracted to, we all are, right? You're attracted to selling a product that you love. And in this case, I loved both the product design, the functionality, the engineering, everything about it was beautiful, but then the impact that it would have on a customer's life. And when you were saying this, just the flash memory in my head of driving out of a village where we had just spent 4 or 5 hours talking to the customer and demoing the lights, and we waited till sunset so they could actually see the power of the lights. And we drove away, and all you could see was that demo light that we had left behind as you drive away from the village, and it's darkness everywhere around them. And it was so palpable and powerful.
That's amazing. You go from there to GSB?
That's right. So, applied to business school from India. So I got accepted and then did my 3-month assignment in the South Pacific before moving from New Delhi to Palo Alto, which you couldn't really find two other opposite ends of the spectrum, I think.
Yeah, I was gonna say, God, the jarringness of going to villages where you've left the one demo light to Palo Alto and everything going on there has to be just like such a dizzying adjustment.
Definitely some shock. I think that a lot of the classic shock of someone being in the emerging markets and coming back, and then amplified by going into this incredibly intense and fun and dizzying experience. You're in the classroom and everyone's got their incredible perspectives. You're surrounded by people that are far more brilliant and accomplished than you could ever imagine a 24 or 30-year-old being. And the somewhat unique perspective that I could bring, having worked in a bunch of emerging markets at a government institution and then on the ground in villages in India, And what I think that lens led me towards, in this, you asked a question earlier, like, how did you kind of get into tech? I understood reasonably well the for-profit social enterprise model of change. And I was fairly aware of the kind of opportunities that existed there. And at the same time, in 2011, 6 years after Steve Jobs put the smartphone in people's pockets in Silicon Valley, like I couldn't think of a greater potential vehicle to impact change and take that ethos, that thread of working to improve like people's lives to the mobile phone. And that just became my singular focus. And so my hypothesis coming out was like, I want to do something in mobile. I want to do something pre-Series A. And I want to do something that has some modicum of a way that I could leverage my experiences having worked either in emerging markets and or on products that help people.
I think this pick foreshadows your investing pick, because there's a lot of pre-Series A startups at that time that were mobile and maybe had some. There's a pretty big circle there. So where did you end up?
So I did what any good B school student would do, and I scraped the VC portfolios, and I organized and ranked all the companies, and I just started going down the list and figuring out where I wanted to end up and where I thought the market was moving. Ended up at a 9-person startup, pre-Series A, with this dream to take on Western Union. And I actually knew something about remittances because we tried to partner with Western Union at USAID because it's a big mover of money, and they wanted to do remittances better. There's a huge compliance cost, there's a distribution cost, there's a customer acquisition cost, and these individuals thought they could do it better. So I ended up going through the interview process to be their first mobile PM. And once I got to the next round, they were like, oh, come fly up and meet the team. And I was like, I don't need to fly. I'll just drive up from Palo Alto to SF. And I look on the website and I'm like, Seattle. I was like, I didn't even know, I didn't think anything existed outside of the Valley. Why would anyone build a company outside of Silicon Valley? So I took my first trip up to Seattle for 6 hours on a Wednesday and was fortunate enough to be able to join them as their first mobile PM with a company called Remitly, which IPO'd a couple of years ago. It was an incredible journey. We grew from 10 people to 400 people, from pre-revenue or early revenue to being able to move over $1 billion to over a dozen countries. And then I spent my last year there running our largest P&L and doing consumer marketing, and that was where I really cut my teeth on marketing analytics and understanding how to drive customer acquisition and LTV and the fundamentals of digital marketing. And so we grow from pre-Series A to a $100 million Series D before I left. And on that journey, I met my now wife, Sheba, actually 4 months in to moving to Seattle. And then, 2015, we fly off to Tanzania, hike Mount Kilimanjaro, come back engaged, get married on a farm outside of Seattle. And 2016 happens. I crossed 4 years at Remitly. This country and the world changed with the introduction of an unhinged individual in the White House. I think a confluence of what was happening macro and that risk-taking kind of thread of, realizing that if we don't take risks now, we're not going to necessarily take them later. And so we, for many life reasons, and there's a whole story of how we chose Kenya, why we chose Kenya, but suffice to say that the objective function was, what non-OECD country do we want to live and work in for a minimum of 12 months? And Nairobi was it. And so we picked up, we sold our stuff, we quit our jobs, and ended up in Nairobi. She had a job literally 2 days after we landed. She started as dean of a girls' boarding school. And I intentionally kind of arrived with nothing in hand. I had like 76 meetings in 90 days, and I met literally every founder and VC that I could get my grubby hands on. And I did diligence on every sector of the economy and was like, do I want to go into ag tech? Do I want to go to energy tech? And I called up an old friend who had a company that had 100 people operation in Kenya. I called Tala. I was like, hey, can I go visit your team? And long story short, spent the next 5 years as an exec at Tala, which does digital banking in emerging markets, Kenya, Mexico, Philippines, and India, and provides capital and payment services to millions of people outside of the banking system. And that was that was post Series C. We ended up raising $150 million Series E in 2021. And that was kind of again, looking back, nicely stitched together, picked up where I left off at Remitly into like growth stage startup. And then picked up from like wherever I was in Remitly to like a 250 person team and an $80 million P&L and just that next level of responsibility and interactions with the board and fundraising and driving strategy and helping the business navigate COVID and just learned a tremendous amount about how to build and run a team and a company in a highly complex and regulated environment that is lending and doing all of the things that good startups should and should not do. And that was the 5 years, 2 of them in Kenya. And then we moved to LA, which is where the company's based, had our first child, and then went through COVID and crossed 5 years last year at Tala before picking my head up again and making the big shift back to climate.
But let's talk about your reflections then from moving from there to climate or back to climate.
At the core of it was I had spent 10 years in some facet of financial inclusion, and I think that is such a powerful way to improve people's lives. But I had always had this love and passion and anger and hope for how we live on this planet. I have a very amateur side hobby of astronomy and thinking about the Earth from a galactic perspective and our time on this Earth. And for me, it comes back both spiritually and economically and justice and impact to arguably one of the greatest macro trends that's affecting our generation in our lifetime, which is what we're doing to this pale blue dot. And the momentum was there, and I felt this pull and at this point, Remitly had IPO'd and we'd had a kid, and you alluded to earlier, this different stage of life, married and with responsibilities and with an opportunity to leverage what we had built in our careers. I was turning 40. And I started thinking about life from a decade perspective. I was like, what do I want to do for the next couple decades of my life? And there wasn't a shadow of a doubt in my mind that it had to be something climate related. But first I had to take a sabbatical. So I took a number of months off and reinvested in myself. I spent a lot of time thinking about what it means to live a good life and the narrative of my life and what I want to do. And just being able to have that North Star, right? Like I think Winnie the Pooh had said, you won't know the roads and the bridges you'll cross, but if you don't have a view of what you're looking for, you can be sure you won't get there. And for me, it's kind of what kind of world do I want to live in? What kind of world do I want to leave behind? What kind of impact do I want to have, as small as it is on this world? And climate was the vehicle. And so I spent a lot of 2023 basically educating myself on all aspects of science and technology and doing a bunch of intense fellowships and online courses and reading, and then talked to 100 to 200 odd people in climate, investors and entrepreneurs and experts. And that's what took us back to that email in August, where my good friend Daniel Shee from Remitly said, "Hey, I just talked to this guy Ben. I don't think it's for me, but I think it's for you." And I got to read your guide on software and then learned about this idea that was burgeoning in your brain and coming to fruition around Stepchange.
So yes, we met when the fund was going, but like there's something that I was just 6 months ahead of you. I had left Stripe, right? And gone through my own very similar version with slightly different timelines, slightly different inputs. But I even think in that first conversation, it's not like we jumped right into how do you do diligence on a deal. I think we were talking about life and talking about what's drawing us to the macro. I think we probably even in that first conversation talked about loss and talked about how that was shaping our sense of time and our sense of how much time we have and the time we have with our kids and the time we have with work and the big evergreen questions in life. And it was just one of those conversations that I was just like, okay, 45 minutes of that density, and you're like, okay, we're operating in some frequency.
Indeed, and then to that point, I mean, the unique kind of shared experience of birth and loss in a similar time frame, both of us having lost our fathers and both of us having kid and kids, and what that does to how we see ourselves. And I remember had gone through this journey and continued to go through. What is the way that you want to have impact within climate? And it became clear to you, I surmise, that the fund would be a great vehicle to realize that. I think it stems, as you said, from two things. One, kind of this perspective that we have on the impact we want to have, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And two, finding people that are so deeply values aligned that you can go on this journey with and actually take the risk of building something new together.
Yeah. I think for me that's kind of the sort of prompt I went into my kind of transition time sabbatical with, which was like trying to actually just understand myself better and what motivates me, what energizes me, who motivates me and energizes me, because those transitions, sometimes they happen kind of naturally every 4 or 5 years if you're changing from one job to another, but sometimes you're in a decade of fintech and it is somewhat continuous. And then if you really want to step back and recalibrate to a new version of yourself or a new version of the world, like we're in a pretty different place in 2023 than we were in 2013 when it comes to the climate position we're in. Like that decade, a lot shifted. Right. From just like how off target we were, or you kind of have to redigest new information if you're going to say, okay, what role am I supposed to play in the world? And then even more quickly iterating is your own sense of self, I think, and your own sense of your own values and goals and the way you think about. If I go to the version of myself in 2013, I always wanted to care deeply about what I worked on, be really into the product and into the problem, into the psychology of it. But I felt an abundance of personal time, but I didn't feel this like potential scarcity of time. And for me, that's like the lasting impact of loss. And I think it's actually one of the lasting like gifts of loss is realizing that your personal time and your personal time to work on things with people you love to work with is potentially actually very scarce. And as a result, I think should be picked very carefully, because this could be the last job we ever do because we got decades to do it, or it could be the last job we ever do because we only get 9 months left, right? Like who knows? And right. I lost my dad in a very sudden way where there wasn't even the warning of that, and he made it to 57, so I got 27 years with him. Could have made it to 97, or could have made it to 47, and like I just that right. reality and reality of also then how to think about time with your kids and how to, balance all of that.
The reality check that it's almost metaphorical to our time on this planet and how fleeting it is, and how we as a humanity don't have a good sense of the trajectory of how life is going to go on Earth. And it's like kind of the macro and the micro. But that's interesting. I was particularly surprised and attracted to the Climate Papa brand that you had created, because one of the things that I thought and wrestled with a lot during sabbatical was, can I have it all? Can I attempt to integrate life and work in such a way that it honors all sides of myself? And then I kind of met you and saw you leading with that. One of your motivations for working in climate was being a papa, but is there also the other side of the motivation of loss? And does Climate Papa have kind of dual meanings in the sense of being one as well as having a relationship with one that has impacted you?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think it can't not, because you can't run the A/B test and be like, what would I be doing now if my dad was still going and still around in this way? But I think that my own personal sense of urgency with work and like what I do at work and how I do it and who I do it with, combined with my sense of urgency of savoring the time I have with my kids and having my kids also like not also kicking that can down the road personally, because knowing that like this is a little bit dark, but like the sooner I have them, the more time I get with them. It's just kind of like the way I like realize that. And if they ever choose to have kids, then like that determines how much time I get with my grandkids. Once I digested all of that, I was like, okay, these things that matter to me, I want to like just be all in on. And so I think in that way, Climate Papa was just like saying, these are kind of my two things that I'm setting myself up. It's going to define at least the next decade and probably multiple decades of my life. I think I've said this to you before. I don't do hobbies. Or put differently, like this is my hobby. And that actually is an echo as well of my dad. His hobby tended to be intertwined with what might look like work for others. That just is how he was motivationally wired. And so for me, all of this like is just this grand problem that I do want deeply integrated and aligned. Can you have it all? The answer is always no. And the answer is always like, well, maybe it depends. In the next month ahead, there's all these amazing climate conferences. I wish I could make it to all of them. I can only make it to a couple things because these things can be in tension. Simultaneously, I think there is ways they can be much more aligned than not. And I feel super, super privileged to navigate it in a way where we're creating it ourselves and we're creating it in partnership in a way where we're like figuring out that alignment. I guess even more so over the last summer, which we can talk about.
Oh, well, yeah. So much about life. We spend a lot of time thinking about what to do. And so much of life is defined by how you do what you do. And having this awareness and perspective up front of loss and of urgency and of finitude and just our place on earth and that perspective kind of essentially woven into the fabric of our fund. I've seen how it changes both what you and I talk about, how we plan our time, and even to how we connect with founders who we see as humans, not just as deals, and just this ability to bring all of that forward. It makes us happier day to day, which in turn makes us more productive, which in turn makes us better at our work, which in turn will produce a better result for the portfolio, which in turn produces a better result for the climate and for humanity. I don't think I'd ever formally put this together, but it begins with this integration of our sense of time on this planet, informed by the experiences that you and I have had that have then been amplified this summer, which I don't think we fully appreciated and anticipated when we got the fund off the ground.
A year ago, probably when we met, it was a conversation Anna and I were having around like, are we ready to go for 3? Getting ourselves mentally there. And then, basically been on the kind of journey to that for us until May. And the summer for me was just been defined by the blur and joyousness of that, and trying to be gentle with my own expectations of things we can get done. How do we prioritize the couple founders that we really want to meet right now? And how do we do that? But then I think we got the joy of some parallels. And so what was it? A month after we had our third,
29 days.
29 days, yeah.
Yeah, no, we welcomed our second. And yeah, I think when we met, it was both a conversation and not a conversation, because we were in the adoption process and didn't have any control on timing. And so it could have happened during the life cycle of this fund, or couldn't have. For whatever reasons, we get the phone call, and our lives change, and our summer turned into that blur. And I think we've talked about this during our nap time and feeding IC calls of just how amazing and in the end of the day fortunate it was that we kind of are traversing on this journey together with newborns in the house and this newborn fund.
Yeah, it's gonna it is wild. It's how much newness, these new little humans and this new emerging fund, and we spend all of our time with new emerging companies. It feels like we're just kind of immersed in the beginnings of things, and our families is evolving to that next shape of what it looks like with you as a family of 4 and as a family of 5. I mean, on one hand, that's change, it's transition, it's hard, it's new identities for us and on all fronts. And I don't know, I love it. I love because to me, yes, you can get growth in your 7th year somewhere to your 8th year, but you have to work to get growth there. You don't have to work when you're 7 years into a job somewhere. Everything's just raw and new. And our little fund is like an infant who is just trying to figure out how to see across the room and all of that. And then we have these humans that you don't need to abstractly figure out how to get their brains grow. You just need to do the things. You just need to be with them. You just need to feed them. You just need to talk to them. It is just inherent in. And so I love growth, I think. And this just feels like we're just in an overflowing cup of growth.
This tinderbox of growth compressed in time. And I think, it's been interesting because one might think that, when you go through this, things things slow down, and it's been the opposite for us, fortunately. But as we have, particularly founder calls over the summer and bringing the baby onto it, or talking about the sleepless night that we had before, it brings the humanity forward. And I think you and I, having built companies, realize that while it is so important to get strategy right and figure out the unit economics and understand product market fit, so much of what leads a company to succeed or not happens, off the books and behind the scenes. And I suspect and believe it's disarming and heartwarming to be able to have that conversation with entrepreneurs and be able to relate to them in both a founder way as well as just a life way.
Like, why are we doing all this stuff, right? Any of us. Like, why are we working on this? How are we working on it? What's this fun about? Like, it's about the future. And it almost feels cliche to say, but it's like, it's for the children. It's sometimes surprising to me that it's not more kind of obvious that the people could and should bring that forward into the conversation. I just find it interesting when the politics and the activism and the economic and the capitalism, it like doesn't center there, when it is the human motivator for a large subset of people to say like, okay, wait, this is a reason to really think about what 2050 is going to look like, 2070, 2080, and especially in the longer time scales.
And to that point on motivation, it's one thing to see a $1 trillion economic opportunity with the new energy economy, which is true. And it's another thing to have a child and want to leave a better world for them individually as a parent. And I think the third dimension is having a baby is kind of the great equalizer, because you realize that they're all born pure and they're all born precious, and the circumstances of their birth define so much of their life. And if you look at what's going to happen to this climate, the impact is going to be uneven. It already is uneven, and the least advantaged are disproportionately affected, combined with the fact that the greatest growth is happening in emerging markets. And it adds this next level of motivation where, it's for our child, but within our child we can see, or for moments you can see all children. That drives, I think, a lot of why at 2:00 in the morning we can exchange text messages on what we need to do the next day.
That really resonates. And I've been every now and then I like redig back into the Jewish liturgy. I didn't grow up with it. I grew up in a very secular family, and I still consider myself like fairly secular leaning. But I'm always just curious, what traditions have survived 5,000 years? Like, what do they teach that like makes them sticky? Right? It's interesting. Like, it's not that, on one hand, it's not that long. Humans, 200,000 years, 5,000 is not that much of it, but it's longer than most things you can grab onto. So like, what makes it, stick around in our minds as a useful thing to reflect on. And one of those core tenets is just that like every human, every baby is a universe, is like part of the teaching. And that's because, and so like to take a life is not actually just to end a life, it's actually to end like a universe of life, because the lives that, that life exists in the context of, the potential family that life might have. And similarly, to save a life is to save a universe. And I think those are some of the most valuable teachings. And it echoes that Judaism has no monopoly on that sort of teaching and commentary, right? I just find that those echo within that moment of kind of reflection and the intensity of bonding. When I look at the process of bringing a new human into the world, and then realizing that every human was brought into the world more or less the same way, it just is so humbling. And all the humans before us and all the humans ahead, and we operate on such a kind of cerebral, intellectual plane, and in such a modern world on one hand. On the other hand, like this foundational part of how we come into the world and how we come out of the world is the way it is, and is really humbling and connective. And yes, there are still massive discrepancies in outcomes, but there's also like more common than not. It's powerful.
No, it's beautiful. And 3,000 or 4,000 miles east, in India, you have a notion of divinity within each person, and specifically in Buddhism, which is what I'm most familiar with, the concept of Buddhahood, and how every sentient being, every person, has the potential to reach enlightenment and to be Buddha. And and that's coupled with the concept of interconnectedness, and how we are all sentient beings are connected. And you do an exercise where you put on that lens for just a moment, and you see people in the street, and you look at them with love as opposed to whatever judgmental eyes that we naturally have. And it really does foundationally change kind of how you look at that world for that moment. And then you've got to get your kid out the door to summer camp.
There's a recent Ezra Klein episode. I don't know if you've listened to it, the one with Gia. I'll have to link to it because it's one of my favorite episodes recently. Also a nice respite from political conversation. But I think as in that conversation, they talk a lot about the kind of caretaking for a newborn is so physical, just so constant. So the word that they keep coming back to, it is like holy. And they kind of talk about that in juxtaposition of like our attention. I always just think about like when you're with them, they're so big, like in your attentional view, because they can feel so loud. Like them being upset at their most upset can fill all of you, right? And then yes, they're so physically small and so new and all this thing. And so just like, I don't know, that it's just a powerful thing to sit with.
I think one of the arts in life is to be able to hold those perspectives or seemingly contradictory perspectives at the same time, and then channel that into how we act in this world. But the other piece of the puzzle that I thought you were going to go into which is also how big we are to them.
Yes.
And if you think about attachment theory and how
we are their
how
whole
important
universe.
our presence. Yeah. It's phenomenally humbling.
Our eye contact with them right now and the smiles it can generate is like that's their whole thing. That and food, that's everything to them right now. And it's amazing. What a last few months it's been. I don't know, maybe taking a radical 90-degree orthogonal turn, but I also feel, and I think you feel very strongly as well, this like excitement to get into the fall, for me, it feels like the season of the new year and okay, back to school, like let's go. Because we're also just only more motivated. Like I only have more of that kind of desire to spend the time on what matters because, there's only more that matters.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's the beautiful and the philosophical and the motivations. And then there's the like, I've tracked every poop and pee and sleep in this app, and I cannot wait to understand kind of the intricacies of C-PACE lending or what VPPs are going to be doing or what have you. And it is so phenomenally motivating to then turn on that brain and figure out where product market fit really lies.
Yeah. So how's the transition to being a VC been for you?
Oh my. It is thrilling. It is gratifying. It is hard. It is uncertain. It's so many different things, but I think it is just a really interesting, different way to drive impact after being an operator and being so hands-on and in the weeds in a singular set of problems for so long, to then have this breadth of stimulation and potential impact. One of the things that great VCs told me going into this was just the different size and pace of feedback cycles. It's really hard to not be the expert in the room after that's all you've been for your career, and it's really hard to not have the feedback cycle to knowing if you made a good decision or not, like when you do ship a product and you see those user engagement metrics. It's such a blessing, and I for reasons that we discussed at this moment in time, I couldn't think of doing anything else. It's also I love what we're doing because it's like it's both operator and investor at the same time, and we don't need to talk about the trials and tribulations of VCs, but building a fund from the ground up is work. It's a thing, and it's in some ways like a startup, and I love being able to turn on those like COO tendencies of just building building infrastructure and getting shit done and putting together what we need to make this thing scale, at the same time engaging from the VC perspective of kind of more intellectually and more behaviorally understanding whether we're making the right decision or not.
I've started 2 companies before, and this feels like that time period to me, right? And that kind of formative. There's kind of just that infinite set of things to do, yet a need to focus on what really matters. And what really, really matters is like the effectiveness of a partnership and trust and collaboration, communication, and then like urgency on the right things. And it's just, there's just a density to it. Like, I think I look back on those and I'm like, wow, those were like some of the densest years of growth and like output and transition in my own like way of thinking about things. I think for me, I don't know if this hit you at all, but like, I struggled with the external identity shift longer, because I think I always thought of myself as like a builder and a tinkerer and a shipper. And that always felt like clearly productive to me in a kind of impactful way. I think what I've come to realize and appreciate and continue to each day is that doing this job particularly well in a small partnership with amazing founders that are early in their journey is quite different from what a lot of others. So the label is actually it's not a precise enough label to be that meaningful. It's almost like, do you want to be a business? It's a weird professional label if you actually think about it. You could just call us finance people, sure. If I think about what I do and spend most of my time doing, it's really people-centered on relationships with founders and deeply product market centered, right? Like that's what we spend all of our time on. And so there's an activeness. I guess to me, our job does not feel very passive. It feels very active and feels very, in some cases, proactive around, what we're trying to figure out. I can understand, I guess, back to your kind of rebellious counterculture streak, a desire to be a little bit counter the status quo of kind of capital V, capital C.
Absolutely. And that very much resonates. And kind of what you said in terms of like where we put our attention, and so much of leadership is making decisions about like where you uniquely spend your time and where's the leverage, right? That's leadership at so many levels is identifying leverage. And I think as in doing this job, it puts a microscope on us focusing on where we can have the greatest leverage, because you can spend an unending amount of time on these decisions and ways to go. The better we are at placing our attention and finding our leverage, the better we can do it. It is not well encapsulated in the two words VC.
When we actually spend time meeting other VCs in climate tech, they also, like, generally this is true. As a category, it leans so highly collaborative, and people all tend to be rowing in a very similar way, which is nice.
It's true. And it's what's beautiful about where we found ourselves, kind of tying it back to working for something greater than ourselves, and we in a community of people and that share values is, climate is an ecosystem. Climate tech is an all hands on deck and very collaborative ecosystem, as we found, because that's the only way we're going to solve this problem.
Yeah. For you, what does working on climate mean to you, and why, right?
For me, it feels holistic. It feels like it's answering more than just a job question, more than just a vocational question, but actually like a spending time in a way that satisfies my whole self. And what I mean by that is, hankering back to the working at USAID and moving to India and working in villages on what I thought were the greatest problems facing humanity, right? And I think it comes from growing up, taking trips back to India and understanding the luck of my birth had dramatically changed the circumstances of my life, and wanting to see if I could have a hand in increasing opportunity and working towards solutions for other people. This idea of where is the greatest need. I think a theme, and it really feels like it's resonating right now with climate, given the macro environment that we're in, the tsunami of scientific evidence that has just been growing over the last 4 decades, but then accelerated over the last 4 to 8 years, and the existential nature of what we now are facing. There's no greater need or no better place to put our energy, our capital, our mind share, our everything into this problem. When I really if I'm doing a feeding at 2:30 in the morning and the thoughts are spinning, it goes even deeper than that, right? We talked a little bit about our spiritual leanings, and to me this goes towards the the nature of reality that I see of kind of us interconnected. We're all in this together. I'm deeply fascinated, and I draw a lot of inspiration and perspective from the galactic placement, but really understanding like this is the planet that we have, and it's a tiny rock floating in the corner of the Milky Way galaxy, which is in the corner of a neighborhood of galaxies in this infinite universe. And this is all we know we have. And talking about the urgency and finality of life, what other way would I want to spend my like very, very limited time on this very, very tiny miracle that is Earth than to see it continue to prosper and to see it be able to serve more and more people with a better and better quality of life. So to me, working on climate is working towards the world that we want to see for our children and just for humanity. And then the last piece of the puzzle for me is what I love about working in this space is you come across people that are in it for the right reasons. And they're crunchy, they're hikers, they're activists, they're business people, they're lawyers, they come from all walks of life. We have this shared understanding that we want to do something to preserve and better this planet and make it better for all people. And so I think there's that underpinning of surrounding ourselves with people we want to be in conversation with and in the room with. And I feel very lucky to have found a small footing in this ecosystem.
To echo a few things there, one is kind of at the astrophysics level. There's an image that's gone around a few times, at least in climate circles, which is from, I think it was a spaceship in orbit just of the Earth. And this image of how thin the atmosphere is on this ball, all of it, all of life, all the conditions in this amazing Goldilocks moment for our particular species to work. If you study time horizon, you're like, this is a pretty special zone and moment that we're in for our particular life form to be able to evolve and thrive. And it starts to make you reason with the fragility of that. Even absent anthropomorphic changes, you start to reason with like, oh yeah, like this is a temporary state. All these states are temporary. Then you start to understand like how radically we're accelerating changes. You start to kind of get that scale. I think that perspective starts to, I don't know if it's climate pill people, like you become a climate person at some point. Tom Steyer's recent book, I like the framing. I mean, climate papa is one subset of climate people. I think for me, there's one other element of it because that can almost lead you down the kind of historical conservationist thinking, right? The kind of Malthusian, if humans are the problem, we should have less humans, or there's some steady state of humans. The way to protect it is to just do less things. I also have, and maybe this is more like my historical context and career context, I also have this like I have a techno-optimistic like way of thinking about our species. We're also in a really special moment in the human species sense of this exponential curve of progress and iteration. You can talk about technology, but like, let's just talk about infant mortality, right? Like it was pretty common to lose half of children before the age of 5 pretty recently, as in like a few generations back. We're not talking about millennia back. And now in the most developed countries, we're at like 0.3%, right? Like it's, and so we're just on these radically improved ways of living, exponential curves. And then of course, leading technology in our experiences and the internet and mobile and now AI, like I love this stuff. And I feel like some sense of to be a human today and not participate if you're able to in this thrilling kind of invention. To me, like that invention is part of kind of that explorer instinct. For some people, it's like, yeah, they want to actually literally be on the spaceship. I'm excited to just be at the forefront of technical progress. For me, it's the interweaving of those things. You can be a techno-optimist and use that tool to figure out on a global scale and a local scale what everyone needs to upgrade their life into and be a part of driving those upgrades. What a magic swirl of work to do. So it's not conservation and the, hey, don't do things. It's actually, hey, here's the things we need to go do faster, better. For me, that unlocks a skill set that then leads to the tech part of climate tech and venture and what we do with founders and in terms of like actual driving changes and innovation.
I love that. I think it is important in this space to delineate between the kind of maybe older school conservation or the degrowth movement and an abundance mindset and a techno-optimism where we have these massive problems, but never before have we had the tools and the ability in this technological curve to be able to address them. As you were talking, I was just having, images run through my head of right now, a very underreported story, but in Western and Central Africa, there are these massive floods that are wiping out villages, which is not uncommon in the 2024. But there's just one quote that stuck with me from this article over the weekend, and it's just like this, people's livelihoods are in their livestock. It's your assets are still your goat, your sheep, your cows, and their homes and all their possessions and their livestock were washed away, and now they're left with nothing. And it's almost like this techno-obligation. I love techno-optimism, and I like you have kind of think grown up in that from a career perspective. And then what better way to use this phenomenal power that we're unlocking as humanity from a technology perspective towards problems that will truly kind of change people's lives.
Techno-obligation, is that used? Is that a term?
I don't know if it's a thing. It could be problematic, but it just popped into my head and it worked.
I mean, I'm just sitting on that. Like, I think that's interesting. I think maybe when you're a techno-optimist and you grow up a little bit, then you become a techno-obligationist because you realize the Spider-Man quote of "with great power comes great responsibility." And if you're listening to this and if you're on this talking about this stuff, you probably have some semblance of great power in some form or another, whether that's capital, skill set, network, politically or what have you, to then shy away from the greater world and what you could do to nudge it forward. I think, it demands questioning, demands sitting with.
A closer look, an examination.
In various ways.
With all of this, I mean, you mentioned the techno-optimist, and I love that, and it's a little bit about your career journey. You've been leveraging kind of that next step of technology. What drove you to leave the fintech world, to leave the operator world, and say no, climate is the thing beyond the highest level of having the children and understanding that you literally want to do work for your children.
I kind of think of these things like there's always like you need to like sit in some sense of purpose and mission, because days are going to get hard, or there's going to be the weekend moments where you're doubting, and you need to return to that. But the day in and day out is almost never really that experience. It's not at that level. It is, who are you spending your time with and what are you doing with them? And so for me, it comes back to like actually getting quite a bit of energy in that work and realizing that sitting with really smart founders trying to solve some big piece of the puzzle and seeing really that like massive problems exist that are actually not that hard, right? Like from a technical perspective, it is like fintech in 2008, 2009. Like, and if you look at technical capability, it's not, fintech wasn't, there are like your experience with Remitly and Tala where like it needed mobile, but a lot of fintech improvements and a lot of kind of the foundational things actually didn't need any new technical unlock to say the 2010s were this like decade of a massive progress. If you went to try and do something like money movement over APIs in 2010 versus 2020, you're just in a radically different world. And it wasn't some technical unlock. It was actually just industry investment and work. And to me, once I started poking on climate, I'm like, oh, it's a lot like that. Like there's actually we don't need to sit here and wait for some new gee whiz invention to make this stuff better and build the right layers of abstraction and deploy faster to consumers and contractors and, get this money out the door. We actually just need to go do it. And so, the Stripes and the Plaids and the kind of rails that we need to build in climate are just sitting there kind of understaffed. Once I started to digest and just feel that, I was like, okay, how can I help staff it? And whether that's just shine a light on it with some writing, talk to more people, try and encourage the transition for people, and then ultimately find the founders that are in the weeds working on this stuff and help boost them. And so that just became deeply energizing, right? Once I realized I didn't have to see something radically new, that there was a logical way to really deploy my skill set in what feels really impactful. And also these worlds it's not even just the analogy, it's actually also the direct overlap, right? A lot of what we need to do to deploy things faster is a financing problem. It is the cost or the understanding of the cost and payback. And some non-trivial sum of companies we're spending time with like are directly pulling on our fintech background, as well as, us diving deep into climate regulations and whatever it might be. And so like what a wasted opportunity to not take that skill set and kind of orient it over here.
Absolutely. There's so much of this and the thesis that we're driving towards with Stepchange around deployment and adoption is a lot of what fintech went through over the past decade. We have this technology. How do we create the incentive structures and get greater adoption and make it economically viable to make certain behavioral changes, either at the consumer level, the enterprise level, or policy level? And
yeah, and I guess to riff on that a little bit, like the most powerful fintech that I've at least experienced up close is really about access, right? I mean, I think for you as well. And what does access do? It actually shifts, it often like just opens up the market in radically new ways. Like Stripe has a lot of technical innovation that's very interesting, but perhaps the most interesting thing is you didn't need someone at, Chase Merchant Services to give you access to process credit cards via their particular process. You could show up as a startup and get going. And that creates GDP, like literally, right? And is fundamental. And then, kind of the rest of Stripe is from that wedge on out. As we look at, I mean, it's funny, we look at a lot of deals, probably, 60 to 70 companies before we choose to go in on one. And so, we're just starting to get to a point now in the portfolio where we start to see some of the emergent patterns. But what's become a pattern that I guess is not surprising in retrospect is that it's a pattern of enabling access, right? It's a pattern of saying, hey, this set of consumers actually can't access EV charging. So how do we unstick that? Or this set of households cannot access the latest technology. How do we increase that? And first of all, that's like fortunately aligned from kind of a moral place and good. But also, it's actually not surprising when you think about the lowest hanging fruit in what we can do to drive progress. Let's look at where oftentimes the way that we heat our homes or transport around are like need the most upgrade and put the incentives and financing there to actually push it forward. So I think we're going to see in this energy transition that access is a key thing, and that often the best place to focus on enabling access is not necessarily the most affluent household in the neighborhood. And that will have both like a hyper local impact on health and air quality and improvement, and actually the right kind of global focus and impact. I don't know if that resonates with you.
I love that. I mean, financial access and energy access have very similar impacts in creating a foundational layer for consumers, businesses, and societies to just fundamentally level up. Right? You unlock ingenuity and opportunity and growth by leveling up access to other, educational access, public health access. There's a few dimensions in this world, and financial access and energy access are two big ones. The prospect of what we're capable of, in a couple decades with millions, if not billions of more people with stable energy, clean access to clean water, and access to the ability to power their lives and their businesses. I mean, to speak to that, like techno-optimism, the curve is only going to get steeper as we bring more people into their fullest potential.
Yeah, we were just messaging this morning. I mean, not to make this a news show, but like Pakistan is people are starting to like self-power their lives with solar in a way that's like unprecedented. And there's interesting like systemic challenges there, because then the grid gets more expensive to operate for those who stay on it. And we have to figure these things out as a society. But it's actually like pretty amazing to see this market unlock play out in certain places where like, people need energy and it's going to improve their lives. And it's almost like water running downhill in terms of when the economics work. How do you think about the next 10 years for what role we should try and aspire to play in this, and how that's going to weave in with our careers and our families and everything?
One of the things I like the most about when our paths collided was this like the brainwave mind melding that we had of being in the same place of saying, hey, this is a problem that I want to work on for the next decade, if not rest of my life. And to be in this position, to have this long view and to be saying, okay, what are the greatest vehicles for impact? And what are the most interesting places to work? What are the most stimulating ways to do this? For me, I think continuing to be able to learn and grow and be in positions to influence outcomes with capital allocation at individual company levels or even at ecosystem and macro levels. To me, there's no more exciting proposition, and a point in life where I'm so excited to see what's possible over the next 25 years. It's a privilege, and I think the opportunities for us are going to continue to open. I suspect and would bet money that it's not going to be a linear path, but rather it's going to have multiple tentacles and step change functions. But you've been thinking about this as your journey has gotten deeper into climate over the last few years. What's the evolution that you can foresee?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything you said deeply resonates. I think I go back to when do I, if I look over the last year, what are the moments that give me hope and what are the moments that energize me? And those tend to oftentimes be the same thing. And then like, what is the role I can play in more of that happening? I mean, part of what got me into climate at this moment, I mean, this isn't a new thing. 10 years ago, there was a lot of writing about climate change. It didn't yank me the same way. Was I think seeing what this decade meant from 2023 to 2033 and like how just essential a decade it felt. And once I started to really start to grasp that, I can't not jump in now. And so to me, then that presupposes the question of like, am I making the right use of this decade? And is the decade making the right use of me? I'm a year two. I'm really 2 years into the kind of overall journey, 1 year into the journey of the fund. I view this as, let me go after a few things that I know I can do, but also really learn about myself and figure out to make sure that each year, each day is the right utilization of me towards the problem. The fund is in early days and we are, I think, finding an amazing rhythm and routine and finding founders that we're just deeply in with, both ones in the portfolio and ones that we're just even, working through. And so to keep doing the work at these different levels, I think, as you put it, kind of ecosystem, fund, and individual companies has been exhilarating. And I hope those become pillars of work that we have over the decades to come.
Two things you mentioned that really resonated. One is this feedback that we're getting from founders, even ones that we're passing on, not investing, and them coming back to us. And it's encouraging to know that there's a resonance there, the way we're interacting and the particular insights that we're bringing to the table are building a trust with founders that actually can have an impact. The other thing that I like about our approach to this are the fresh eyes. And the idea is that just in the last 8 months, we've had like, why does it have to be like this? And what if we did it this way? And I feel like we do have a few things cooking that I can't wait to put more energy towards and put out into the world that approaches this entire business with the fresh eyes and potentially different outcomes.
Any climate specific predictions?
If you were to truly ask me, like, what do I think is going to transpire? I don't think at a global level we're going to be able to move markets and governments fast enough to not only clamp down on the increased greenhouse gas emissions, but to reverse course and to create the incentive mechanisms that we need. And I think the most vulnerable and the folks in emerging markets are going to suffer the most. I think we're going to see a climate refugee crisis like we've never seen before. We're going to see orders of magnitude, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people forced into situations that are unimaginable. And we're going to go through years, if not decade or more of significant loss to humanity, to biodiversity, and a radical shift in just population and opportunity. And I think there's going to be a continuation of technology development and deployment and chipping away at the problem and more tipping points that we'll see that will bring the best out of humans to act with greater urgency. And we'll come out of it. And the other end will be a new energy economy and a new way to live life in this like phenomenally energy abundant opportunity abundant set of societies, I think there's pain ahead. And our job is to minimize that pain as radically fast as possible and get to the other side.
I think that I start to try and move timelines to like the age of my kids, because that makes it feel personal and real in a way that, again, like you say 2035, like that's a distant date. It's like, not really. It's 10 years from now. Our kids will be teenagers. Like I can imagine them in high school. And so when our kids are in high school is going to be a pretty rough time when it comes to climate outcomes, a low point, because we're in that point of like, kind of regardless of what we accomplish now, like that's when we're experiencing the results. That's gonna be the low. I think as they get into their 20s, I think we'll be coming out of that. And I think by the time they're our age, we'll be living in what I hope will be that upgraded world. Generally, different technologies will take you at different times to distribute, but I think that's when you'll start to see the lifting of some of the worst impacts and stabilization of these things. That's my hope, and that's what I'm working towards. Because if you're realistic, you can't deny what the next decade's going to hold. And I think as people working on this, it's one of the reasons why we'll look at things that are adaptation focused, because it's going to happen. Like what's going to happen when you can't insure your home? What's going to happen when you lose your livestock and the whole village is washed out and you need an emergency relocation as a refugee? Like we need to think about all these problems. And so to kind of blindly ignore that reality and go straight to the problems of 2040, 2050, wouldn't it be grand? Like we got to look at the problems we're going to have in 2030 and go after those. At least that's, I think, my goal with the fund is to look at the next decade with clear eyes, and both the opportunities and the things that we're going to have to work through, and figure out what opportunities and solutions are needed for that.
I think it's where, our experiences over our careers have been about kind of deploying products and services that have immediate impact. And we talk about how the next decade is going to define the quality of life of this next generation. We have to work with urgency, and speed and scale is just the absolute perfect name for a book and a movement, because it is absolutely all that we need.
That's right. Well, excited to be on this journey with you. Hopefully this is the first of many times we have some extended conversations and put them out in the world. It's hard to see this in oneself, but I think that a lot of the founders we jam with and other folks we meet, I think, comment on our energy and the energy that we bring to those conversations. And I think it's that shared, like, resonant frequency effect. Even this conversation, I've already said to 3 or 4 people, like, oh, I'm so excited to send this to you so you understand what it's like to jam with Anay and how it feels. And so excited for that for decades to come.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate that. I'm so grateful that our paths crossed, and now even more grateful that they are converging and growing together, and for decades to come, indeed.
Well, that's a wrap on episode 20 of Climate Papa. I ultimately felt like this episode was a bit of an indulgence. We kept going down some phenomenal rabbit holes and creating a time capsule for where we are and where our partnership is at the fall of 2024. I can't wait to listen back to this years down the road and see how far our journey with Stepchange has gone. And I always welcome listener notes. You can email me anytime at ben@climatepapa.com with feedback, guest suggestions, or otherwise. And if you end up curious about what we're doing with Stepchange, feel free to shoot us a note or check out our fund launch episode number 16 back in January. It's a bit out of date as we've made some new investments and Anay is now full-time, as you heard, but still a lot of fun. As you've gathered by now, Climate Papa is a family affair, and it so happens that in addition to her work as an educator, Anay's partner Sheba is a singer-songwriter. So here's Sheba's song Persephone to take us out.
Did you notice when it rains, I choose a certain color that I can stand under so I can face the day? Did you notice when there's fire, we have to breathe harder? It's almost like my lung has to touch my beating heart to be a little stronger. See, I like gold and I like silver and I like raging green blue rivers. And when my hands need to rise up, I spread my palms into all kinds of colorful love. Sometimes it all feels like it's spiraling. That's when we need Persephone to enter our dreams, to give us freedom and a whole new season. Did you notice when the wind blows, the whispers come in full force. Our ears can open our eyes, uncertainty and hope living side by side. Did you notice when the moon beams, there's a glow that makes us all see? Even in the darkest moments, we don't have to be alone. See, I like gold and I like silver and I like raging green blue rivers. And when my hands need to rise up, I spread my palms into all kinds of colorful love. Sometimes it all feels like it's spiraling. That's when we need Persephone to enter our dreams, to give us freedom and a whole new season. Close your eyes and you'll know who you are. Close your eyes and remember we're full of dust and full of stars. Close your eyes and know the earth never forgets. And the mountains will roar our truth in this very moment. See, I like gold and I like silver and I like raging green blue rivers. And when my hands need to rise up, I spread my palms into all kinds of colorful love. Sometimes it all feels like it's spiraling. That's when we need Persephone to enter our dreams, to give us freedom and a whole new season. Sometimes it all feels like it's spiraling. That's when we need Persephone to enter our dreams, to give us freedom and a whole new season.